You are watching the Pan-African Daily TV with Dr. Susan Tata. The Africa we want. Unity, consciousness, our culture, our spirituality, our history. One Africa for Africans worldwide. Motherlands calling its diaspora home. Join my voice. Join my team. Join my campaign. Campaign 21 hashtag 1 million subscribers on the Pan-African Daily TV YouTube. Be a volunteer. Apply now. Be the new Africa.
After centuries of misguidance caused by slavery, colonization, lack of awareness of our history, and institutional disinformation, a new Africa is on the move, determined and getting organized. Afrika tuko pamoja. Welcome to the United Kingdoms of Great Africa. The United Kingdoms of Great Africa is the credo of the alliance movement of all African intelligences around a common ideal, the unity and development of a strong, conquering and completely dedogmatized Africa through the channel of a strong organization called the Africa We Want Global. You are an African, Afro-descendant, researcher, historian, scientist, or simply an NGO. You want to be part of this great historical march towards the total freedom of an uninhibited Africa? Visit our website www.africawewantglobal.org. Register and discover the range of our platforms for change. AfricaWeWantGlobal.org. Join the kingdom, be part of it. An initiative of Dr. Susan Tata.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this special edition. As you can see, Professor PLO LUMUMBA is sitting right here with us in the studio after a while. And today we want to handle a very exclusive topic, just a topic, but we're so happy to see him again, looking so young and strong and smart as usual. I know during this space of time, he's been observing a lot of issues have been going through the continent. We've had conflicts and wars, endless ones. In fact, not just only the conflicts in Ethiopia, not just the long-lasting, forgotten conflict in Amazonia and Southern Cameroon, not just the ones that actually happened in Mali, and recently the coup d'etats that we've been seeing in Burkina Faso and all that. Things struck our mind when the Russia and Ukrainian war set in. Then Africans begin to see another clear picture of the role and the leadership position of African leaders or political systems that are in operation. So the question many have been asking is, how on earth does European conflicts concern Africa? How on earth have African leaders been called as a mediator on such conflicts or wars? How on earth does long-lasting conflicts and wars on the continent haven't been able to catch the global attention to be able to even equity for sanctions? Suddenly, what has been called or what has been causing a lot of commotion during the past months is a war that broke out between Russia and Ukraine, and the main media and the newspapers all around are talking about sanctions and talking about the invasion and talking about, and we see the global war in a pandemic after COVID. So the question we want to understand today from an expert point of view is, what is actually the difference between a Russian-Ukraine war and the external or the internal conflicts that have been perpetuating our continent for so a long time? How does that, for God's sake, warrant the authority of African leaders as mediator for the first time that the world is calling Africa to be as a solution on the table, even when they don't have one seat in the United Nations Security Council? So Africans are kind of like confused. When this whole thing broke out, it was like something exposed to the world. But we can answer these questions. We've been rambling around and turning. So our expert is here who is actually going to take it step by step, what he has observed from all this time, what his opinion, what are the challenges that could cause this kind of commotion, and what are the solutions that could be sustainable and long lasting. What is it that we as Africans can learn from the way Ukrainians have been handled, from the way refugees, even the whole European Union and Europe and the world standing up, and treating them. But not only that, the unexplainable marginalizations of Africans in Ukraine during this period has also opened our eyes, and a lot are questioning. So today we have Professor PLO Lumumba here, who is actually going to tailor-made a solution or analyze the challenges, what globally could have been this problem and what we are learning from it this evening. So I want to welcome you, Professor PLO Lumumba, for such a long time. We're so grateful that you're here. But we know you are not alone. We know him with a backup, your friend and personal person, Dr. Emon Folefak, who is joining us also from the United States, would be on this conversation with Prof. So good evening to you, Dr. Ed and Professor.
Good evening. Let me start by saying that I'm not speaking as an expert. I will be making my comments as somebody who is curious and follows the events of the world to the extent that they affect Africa. And I'll preface my comments by saying that the international economic and political order is still skewed against the African continent. The African continent is taken for granted. The African continent is placed in a position where it is expected to follow the dictates, particularly from Europe. The former colonizers hold the unspoken view that if anything is happening in their former colonies, then it is incumbent upon those former colonies to simply ask, how high do we jump? The British, therefore, expect their former colonies to do that. The French expect their former colonies to do that. The Portuguese are silent, but I think they do. And the real hegemon in the world, the United States of America, expects everybody to do their bidding. And if you've listened very keenly to some of the commentators on the European conflict in Ukraine, they are actually amazed that it is happening in Europe. And they say in their both guarded and unguarded moments that we are surprised that this is happening in the heart of Europe. It is not happening in the Middle East. It is not happening in Latin America. It is not happening in Africa. And that tells you the contempt with which they hold Africa. That tells you the disdain with which they look at Africa. That tells you how low Africa is in the pecking order. And if you look at the activities of the United Nations organization, both the General Assembly and the Security Council, they are on overdrive. The Secretary General of the United Nations has taken this as something that is so critical. And they don't do that when there are conflicts in Africa. They have not done that in the case of Tigray. They have not done that in the case of Southern Cameroon's Ambazonia. They have not done that in the case of the Democratic Republic of Congo or Mozambique, or the activities of Boko Haram in the Sahel. And that is a clear message to Africa and Africans that we are not in the international equation when push comes to shove. And it is also clear to us that our affairs are not considered to be primary affairs and that we can be ignored. And if you look at some of the statements from the world leaders, and I'm using the word leaders quite loosely to mean the leaders of the United States of America and European countries, in their view, the world is Europe. The world is the United States of America. The world is the conceptual West to include Australia. the rest of the world, that is to mean Asia, and particularly Africa, can be ignored. The only reason why countries such as India and China are receiving the attention they do is because they are beginning to raid the economic and indeed military territory of the conceptual West. In a nutshell, I'm saying, historically, the Europeans and the Americans have always globalized Africa, and they have always made us participate in their wars. They did so when we were under their tutelage during the World War I, which was actually a tribal war of European tribes. They did so during the Second World War, which was once again a tribal war, but they never called them tribal wars. They called them world wars. And once again, through our very screens, we are seeing what is happening to the world, the sanctions that are being visited against Russia and which are affecting the entire economic situation of the world because of the connectedness of the world. All countries, now excluding Russia in the economic arena, are linked to SWIFT. I didn't know that Russia and Ukraine combined supplied so much wheat to Africa. I didn't know that the connectivity in the supply chain is so intertwined that what happens in Russia and Ukraine cannot be ignored in the content of Africa. That, to me, is the context against which we must hold this conversation. Thank you very much.
It is exactly like what we were saying. When any conflict happens in the West, it becomes a world war. We had the World War I, even though it was being fought in the West, World War II. And this apparently what the world is saying, a world war, an internal conflict between what others have referred to as brothers fighting each other. And out of a sudden, it has to be the whole world. But of course, Prof, we did see some sanctions. And if you see the mobilization of those sanctions like NATO nations, actually, that should be evidence enough to say if sanctions are being placed on European conflicts by African leaders or countries, that was quite, challenging to observe.
We have a saying in Kiswahili that if your brother is being shaved, put water on your own head or hair, because you too may be shaved. And what we have seen with the treatment that has been meted out against Russia should tell Africa that we are living in a fool's paradise or even in a false paradise. That if you misbehave, the West can cut you out of SWIFT. The West can cut you out of their Visa and MasterCard. The West can ensure that they cut you off Twitter, cut you off Facebook, cut you off all these international communication systems, and you go back into darkness of sorts. And this, to me, does send a clear message to us that going forward within the continent of Africa, we must learn certain lessons in the military arena. How organized are we? In the political arena, how organized are we? In the economic arena, how organized are we? How are we organized in our supply chain systems? Right now, Africa is very happy because Google have just landed their intercontinental connectivity in Lomé in Togo. That very same thing that has now landed in Togo, which we are going to depend on, can be switched off if we misbehave. And this is what has happened in the case of Russia. Perhaps Russia is a little bit different because technologically is ahead of many of the African countries. But we are so dependent on the Western world and increasingly dependent on Chinese in the things that we do in our capital cities and in our daily lives, that going forward, it is going to be very critical that we style up. I love giving this example that today, if you go to any European capital, or rather any African capital, the largest supermarket is Carrefour from France. And the chicken that you are eating is Kenchik from the United States of America. The taxi that you are taking is Bolt or Uber, Bolt from Estonia, Uber from the United States of America. The motorcycle person who will bring you your Kenchik to your house in Nairobi or in Accra is Glovo from Spain. Your houses is being guarded by KK Securities, which is Gadawild from Quebec in Canada. That is the state of Africa. And when you are in such a state, it tells you that the other side has a stranglehold. But to escalate it to what is the subject of conversation now, what has taught us is that Africa is not in the front burner in the scheme of things. If you look at the number of people that have died, for example, in the Amazonian war, they are in the thousands. But nobody mentioned that. We are now talking about war crimes against Vladimir Putin, but we are not talking about war crimes against Paul Biya. We are talking about war crimes in that part of the world. We are not talking about war crimes in the Democratic Republic of Congo, in the Sahel, or in other parts of the continent of Africa. And Africa can be ignored, and Africa is being ignored. Why the Western world is concerned about Africa now, they want African countries to vote with them so that they have the numbers. Say the entire continent of Africa is with us. Nobody supports war. War is undesirable. It causes pain and suffering. But many African countries are not bold enough to say that the reason why we are tacitly on the side of Russia is because at critical times in our history, Russia, then a part of the Soviet Union, was involved in the struggle to liberate most African countries. And that is why you see that the voices of African countries are muted, and they don't want to come out as boldly as the European Union would want them to come out, or the United States of America would want them to come out. And very soon you see the kind of diplomacy that will take place in the continent of Africa through the Commonwealth, through the European Union, through the French-speaking countries, and of course through the American Secretary of State Blinken, to twist African countries to behave, or else the IMF and the World Bank will be unleashed on them. I think Dr. Folefa can weigh in now.
Yes. I was just about to say, Dr. Folefa, you've been actually enjoying this piece. I see your jaws are all widened. The way Prof is, cooking this thing and saving out here. Everybody's, even on the comments, I want to salute all of you that are saying the wisest man on the continent and the wisest man in the world is Professor PLO. I mean, we appreciate your comments, and it shows exactly his engagement in the process and the leadership, his concerns and his worries. But Dr. Edmond Folefa, what do you think about what Prof has just been saying?
So I always think that unless you understand the philosophical concept of where people are coming from, you really cannot be able to understand their actions or best. It's the same thing like if you're looking at a house, you see the way that the architect designs the house, then you can understand, you can actually begin to picture what is going to be in that house when it's completed. Now, I'll go back and then just look at two philosophers, or maybe theories that the West has it. One is, Hegel. Hegel said that mankind is made for history and not history for mankind. And if he said that, it was because he thought back then that human beings were actually supposed to be very passive in the world, and then the universe should take the place and do exactly what the universe does. The white man believes exactly that for Africa. We're just supposed to be part of the world, and the world would give us, we should take whatever the world gives us. But for them, the mankind makes it, the history is made for mankind. You have to reverse that, because the history, they are the ones who determine their own history. Africans are not supposed to play a role in developing their own history. brings me back to what I've always told my good friend, Professor LUMUMBA, that my theory has come to be this, and I probably take from Du Bois to say, okay, God created animals and created mankind who is white, and somewhere in between they created these humanoids who can actually like pray. They may actually even love. There may be professors, there may be doctors, there may be lawyers and stuff like that, but they are nonetheless, they are not considered humans. And it's a basic fact. And this is why when they say that the war, they are aghast at the war in the center of Europe, it's like the war has finally come to affect mankind is being this depraved, fighting a war, because to them, mankind is European. It's not African. And so when Africa, the fight in Africa is considered to be, if you meet two animals fighting, if you meet animals in zoos struggling and fighting, that's not news. It's not breaking news, is it? So this is where these people have this, there is a certain degree of the way they underestimate they look at the African with contempt, with that, to them, to the extent that they care about Africa, it's about the resources. It's not about the people. To the extent that they cared about the people, it is about what they can use you to get, in service of mankind, which is who is white. I mean, look at the entire system and look at the white power structure of the world. It is exactly what I have described in that analogy. And this is why you talked about the numbers of people who are dying. I can give you figures. Ukraine up to today, there have been roughly 1,500 people have died in Ukraine, right? And that's what the office of the High Commission for Refugee Human Rights would tell us, and that include about 59 children. And that they tell you in Ambazonia, right up to now, we've had about 46,000 people that have been killed by this conflict. And in Gabon alone, the United Nations itself, when they established that Bia's human engineered monsters, whom they erroneously called the military, actually massacred 30 people, including 15 women and 4 pregnant women. And up to now, we've had at least 50 babies that have been killed, 200 and something children that have died over just the last year alone, including the ones that are shot in school and killed in school. Baby Martha, Baby Caroline, and all whatnot who are killed. These are not accidents. These are perpetrated murder. And the only reason why they are not held responsible is because Biya is a stooge of the French, right? And that's why it becomes a monstrous hypocrisy on my part. And when I see the French, Mr. Macron, actually straddling the world and talking about, human rights, talking about how they are killing human beings. Again, if you were very concerned about those people in Ukraine, about the killing of the human beings in Ukraine, what about your stooge? What about your puppet that you actually have imposed on the people in Africa? I mean, in the Cameroons, who are killing us in Amazonia and massacring our people. 400 and something villages have been razed to the ground intentionally. This is not unintentional. So this is the problem. So again, it's because they don't consider us as humans, and that's the problem. And I think for me, it's really not about what the West thinks about us. It's more about, to me, the outrage is what our own so-called leaders in Africa are doing to us. Prof, you can comment on this. I saw Thabo Mbeki was actually happy that he was invited to mediate or be part of the mediators between the Russians and the Ukrainians. I'm like, what? What about the conflict in your backyard, in the DRC? What about the conflict in Amazonia? Why can't you mediate in these conflicts, right? There were some people actually even trying to raise money from Africa to send to Ukraine. Think about that.
Susan, I know you want to come in, but just to say something about what Dr. Folefaka said. You see, we've got to look inward sometimes. And one of the most painful things about Africa, you will remember that the year 2020 was declared the year of the silencing of the guns
Of the guns, yes.
by the African Union. And the intention at that time was that if Africa was going to realize the gains that she's promised herself in Africa Agenda 2063, then you needed peace for sustainable economic, political, and cultural development. They also took the view that if the Africa Continental Free Trade Area was to work effectively, you needed peace. And those who know then mapped the conflicts that needed to be resolved. They included the conflict in Ambazonia. They included dealing with Boko Haram in the entire Sahelian region. It became necessary, they said, to deal with Darfur and Southern Sudan and northern Mozambique and eastern Congo. But beyond the pronouncement, there was no deliberate effort on the part of the African Union or individual African leaders to actually come out. Because one would have thought that a conflict such as in Ambazonia is one that should be flagged, and that leaders, even within ECOWAS, would say, in the manner that we now see them responding to the coup d'etats. You've seen how they have responded to the coup d'etat in Guinea-Conakry. They have responded to the coup d'etat in Chad, in Burkina Faso, in Guinea-Bissau. And yet, in a situation such as Ambazonia, where refugees are being generated, people are being killed, and there is talk of genocide, nobody talks about it. And that is true of what is happening in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And from where I sit, the reason is because conflict is an industry. It is an industry that feeds the European military machine, because they are the ones who supply the arms, they are the ones who supply the related hardware, and in such situations, they also offload their food, whether it is corn or whatever it is that they do. There is no shortage of their experts who now operate in those areas. And knowing that as we do, can we afford the luxury of remaining in a perpetual complaining mode as Africans? Isn't there anything that we can do? Dr. Folefak and you, Dr. Susan, are aware that we have now initiated a kind of a signature where we want to do a petition. And when we talk about a petition about the conflict in Ambazonia and other African conflicts, we are simply saying that we want to marshal Africans of goodwill to demonstrate, not by word, but by deed also, that we have a concern and that we must prick the conscience of these individuals who are in positions of authority so that the AU can rise up. This year, they have said, is the year of agriculture and nutrition-related things. If there is conflict, who is going to the farms? Right now, as I speak to you, in many areas in Africa, nobody can go to the farms. They are not farming in Tigray. They are not doing so in southern Sudan. They are not doing so in most of the Sahelian. So it is incumbent upon Africans, those in the mother continent and those in the diaspora, to now make demands of the political class that something must be done. And you can see Europe is always ahead of the game, and the Chinese are ahead of the game. Right now, they're already funding African initiatives. You may know that the British government has now offered 35 million to the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. And the idea is that they want to control, African institution. You saw what the French did with the proposed eco-currency in West Africa. And they are training our armies. And these are some of the things that we who have the opportunity to have a conversation such as this have the obligation to flag. We know that we can do it. We know that attempts will be made to disrupt us. But yet I believe that if our voices are united and if our voices are clear and persistent, then the world will begin to listen to us. And some of the ways in which we will do it is to begin lobbying the regional bodies. If there is a conflict in the ECOWAS region, we do petitions for whatever they are worth. If there are institutions of an international nature, we mount cases. If the conflict is in SADC, in the Maghreb, in Central Africa, and we go to the African Union, which is, as you know, largely a toothless bulldog, we go to the Security Council, we must make demands in the knowledge that this is a relay race. We may not get the things that we want now, but we must hand over the baton to succeeding generations by clearly defining what our concerns are and articulating them, and being aware that we don't have friends out there. Those we think are friends are actually our enemies, and they pretend to help us, but the humanitarian organizations that they bring to our countries, most of them are not designed to help us in the long run. They are designed to perpetuate these conflicts so that they can retain their jobs and keep us on a short leash.
Correct. Edmond?
Yeah, so Prof, I'm glad that you actually brought up this, and you know exactly the reason why the systems that we have don't work for us, right? I've always contended that stupidity and intelligence, morality, immorality, these are random these are random concepts, in the sense that if you go to everywhere and take quantities, I mean, if you go to anywhere, go to America, go to China, go to North Korea, go to Kenya, go to Nigeria, take the same number of people randomly. They will have equal number of stupid people as equal number of intelligent people. You will have equal number of moral and equal number of immoral people. The only thing that makes a difference between the societies that would grow and those that will not grow are how the societies are organized. What are your own, social contracts in your institute, in your system? To that, in your, localities. In that respect, the white power structure, the Europeans, the Americans, and increasingly the Chinese have actually beat us. And this is what Africans need to really come back home and ask ourselves how our institutions, how are we organizing ourselves in the Europe, for instance. Look, in around 1990, just before the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989, 1990, you see had Nicolae Ceausescu in Romania, who if you could compare the atrocities, they were on par with the Mobutus and Idi Amin. You had the countries of Eastern Europe, Poland, even places, Czechoslovakia, and so on and so forth. All of these countries were not Hungary. These countries were not better than the most of the African countries. In fact, they were far, less developed than many of the African countries. But after the fall of the Berlin Wall, what did these people do? They said, okay, we're going to go there and invest, but in return for the investment, these are the kind of governance things that we would want to see within your institute, within your countries. And so they organized themselves that way because they understood that you cannot have dictatorship and democracy existing side by side, bring them onto the table to have a dialogue. That's not going to be a dialogue, because the democratic countries are going to be talking something completely different from the countries that are governed by dictatorship. In Africa, if you look back in Africa, for instance, now, the countries that have taken baby steps into a representative government, Kenya, Ghana, and in places like even Botswana, South Africa itself. If you look at these countries, mostly their own approach to the things that they have their problems, but this is completely, it's a different in kind to say the countries that are governed by dictatorship or that are telegoverned from Europe, like the French-speaking African countries, right? Because these are the countries, and that is the reason why the AU, as Prof. you mentioned, is a toothless bulldog. What are you going to go to the EU and talk about to somebody when they know about election, about democracy, about representative governance, about human rights, when they know that they themselves are actually there to do the bidding of the master who has kept them there, and they didn't get there by any because of any qualification they had. The only qualification was to agree to servitude in service of the master. So this is the problem Africa has. And for me, Prof, you guys need to be functioning. We need to be asking the countries that are the nation's democracy in Africa to form their own organizations and be able to say, for everybody to join this organization, these people are going to, you have to have X, Y, or Z in terms of human rights, in terms of representative governance, in terms of, and things like this, human development. These are the things that might eventually be, make us begin to move towards a situation where our institutions, our collective energy will not be again used only to try to put out these ambers or these fires, but also but think towards making something that would help us develop as a people.
Thank you so very much. I mean, you are watching on today's program, Professor PLO Lumumba and Dr. Edmond, and they actually together under our support as well, launch a petition out there, and the outcome should be 1 million signatories to stop the conflicts on the continent, and particularly in Southern Cameroon, Ambazonia. So if you're watching us anywhere, from where you are, we see we're almost 1,000 here. Imagine all of us would sign out that petition. It will be dropped in this mail and we're going to circulate it. We've been circulating it for a while. I just want to come back on that topic where Prof said, at this time in point, there are things where or why the leadership or the union or the African Union is silent is just because at one point in time, they can switch off and you go back to your primitive lifestyle. Even when they do that, Prof, what is bad in it? Haven't we seen economics where they've levied sanctions on them, like Cuba and all others, and these economies have learned to develop by themselves? It's like they should switch it off so that we can learn to redevelop from our own. What about that?
I wouldn't want Susan to use the word primitive. Primitive, when used, simply suggests that our way of life is below a certain level defined by somebody else. What I'm against is dependence. There's somebody called Makami who has written a beautiful book, Dependent Independence. And I am saying that knowing as we do that these structures are designed from outside, is it not the right time for us now to ensure that we begin to create things which can take care of our affairs? This is exactly why the Chinese cannot be ignored, because the Chinese are creating their own monetary systems. If you come to a continent of Africa, out of the 55 countries or 54, depending on who you are talking to, we have 33 currencies. Why should we have 33 currencies? Why shouldn't we move towards a single currency? Why can't we, as the continent of Africa, have our own card system? Today, if I want to travel to Nigeria and I'm applying for a visa in Nairobi, I have to pay using a Visa card. Nearly 90% of transactions in Africa are terminated in the dollar. As long as we do that, we are weak. And I'm saying that we are 1.4 billion of us. And these are the things that we ought to address to ensure that we have greater intra-African trade, that we have greater connectivity, which is African bound. If you look at the major mobile telephony companies in Africa today, aside from MTN in South Africa, by whatever name called, is either Orange, which is French, or is Tigo, or it is Vodafone, which is British, so that even this assumption that mobile telephony penetration is Africa is deluding ourselves. Where do we have something that is generated in Africa? The South Africans can do that. The Kenyans can do that. The Nigerians can do that. So research and innovation and research and development is something that we ought to invest in. Look at what happened to us during the COVID pandemic. We called it vaccine apartheid because we were either waiting for Moderna or waiting for Pfizer or waiting for Sinovac. Why couldn't we? And I remember, Dr. Folefak will know this better than I, that the people of Madagascar through the Malagasy Institute of Applied Science came up with something called COVID organic. Whether it was efficacious or not, I do not know. But I would have expected African universities and institutes of research to say, you have something here. Why don't we look at it so that we come up with an African vaccine? And you can go into every sector, whether it's in the pharmaceuticals, whether it's in the military arena, whether it is in the economic arena. We are consumers of what we do not produce, and that cannot be good. Today, you go to test yourself for PCR test. The kits are either from the United Kingdom or the United States or from China. But look at little Cuba, sanctioned since the 1940s. And that sanctioned environment has now become a breeding ground for innovation. I'm not saying that they don't have their problems, but it has told them that you cannot rely on your brother or your sister to be your keeper. We Africans must stop thinking that we have people out there who are subscribing to the message of Jesus Christ to love their enemies and to love their neighbors. There are no such people. They just see us as meat on the table to be consumed. And the sooner we realize that, the safer we are. And one may ask, but we are not in government, what can we do? History has demonstrated not once, not twice, that governments are changed through consistent agitation by the people. Dr. Folefak talked about the changes that took place during Nicolae Ceausescu's Romania. It is the people who rose up. We know what happened with the Berlin Wall. We know what happened with the former Yugoslavia. We know what happened with Czechoslovakia. We know what happened with the Balkan states. We know what happened in South Africa during the Sharpeville and the Soweto massacre. We know what is happening, what happened with Omar el-Bashir. We know what is happening in Ambazonia. It is the people themselves who are rising. And what we are saying is that if people are organized and their ability to organize is sustained, then they can change. The only thing that we must know is that there are no instant coffee solutions, no instant changes, no microwave solutions. Sometimes these things will take a century. Ours is to play our part and to speak even when it appears that nobody is listening, but let the message go out clearly, unequivocally, and consistently. And I think that is what we need to do going forward.
Great. I know tomorrow we're still going to have you here, Dr. Edmond Folefak, to kind of like refresh the minds of the people about the situation in Cameroon's or Amazonia, as an indigenous of the conflict, as in, you know, because sometimes you said it's like the forgotten people of Southern Cameroons. And other conflicts in the other regions like Nigeria as well is not stable, the Yorubas and the Fulanese and every other thing. So it's like everything is forgotten now. The silencing of the gun, it's getting much louder, like Prof is saying. So tomorrow, what is it that you actually would be refreshing the mind or reminding us about?
Yeah, thank you, Susan. Tomorrow, I really want us to think about, put in perspective the war in Amazonia, and especially with the context of the war in Ukraine, and look at how the Europeans have responded to the war in Ukraine, and see how, contrast that with how the Africans are not responding or ought to be responding to the war in Amazonia, because the war in Amazonia I know many people have actually kind of think about, erroneously describe this war as a war of language, colonial master languages, which is nothing can be further from the truth. If one were to like talk about language as the sole reason, or even ethnic origin as the sole determinant factor of being, whether you should be a people of the same country or not, then is that not the same thing? Then why is everybody getting angry with Mr. Putin? That is the ideology that Putin is using in Ukraine, to say, oh, they are Russian-speaking people in Ukraine, or we're once the same people. But you've had different lived experiences. You have different social contracts. I want to use this thing. I want to use tomorrow to talk to the people about Ambazonia, to look at the war in Ambazonia as a representative, as a poster child of the conflicts in Africa. Which is why, when you look at that petition that that was actually launched by PROF and supported by us, it's simple. Stop the war in Ambazonia and all wars in Africa. Because in the final analysis, what is the real reason for this war? The reason for this war is the reason for these wars are because the people are being governed without their consent. Because there is no issue, there is an issue of self-determination. Actually, as a mother, that your kids, when they are young, you live with them, you provide them accommodation. As long as they cannot support themselves, they look upon you as a parent, and then you support them, and all of you, and everything is fine. They get to a certain age, even in teenage years, they can no longer sleep together on the same bed with their siblings. There will be trouble. By the time they get to a certain adult age, those children are going to, if you want to force them to live under the same roof with you, there may be trouble. So that you have to have a different arrangement. In Ambazonia, I want to talk to you tomorrow, and we will talk about this tomorrow, that this war in Ambazonia is much more than, it's not a war of language. That is nothing much sillier than that for anybody to think about that. That is actually the view that is perpetrated by the French. It's a war of self-determination. It's a war of failed decolonization. It's a war that I can actually even bring it back to the doorsteps of the Europeans on the same way that they control us as puppets. And there is human carnage that is actually taking place there, including 40-something thousand people who have died, 400 and something villages burnt, 6,000 cases of rape that we have documented, 700,000 kids who haven't gone to school in the last 5 years, and all of these to serve the interests of the French, to serve through their puppet master, Mr. Biya in Yaoundé. And it's a war where also, as we talk, Prof knows, and you know, Susan, my friends, my colleagues, my brothers are in jail, they went to Nigeria and kidnapped them, and like Yoktabe, Julius, and the others who are in jail. The best that Ambazonia had, these people, Cameroon flaunted all international laws, went to Nigeria and kidnapped them. And nobody is talking about this. Again, because the French have a seat at the United Nations. These are the things I want us to uncover. So people see the monstrous hypocrisy and the base pretense of the likes of Macron and the French and the so-called, Western, tyrant-hating, democratic, Christian-loving countries.
Thank you.
I think that is very powerful, Dr. Folifak. I wish I'll try to join in if I have time, because I think that is very critical. And one of the things that I hope you'll be mentioning is that in order to ensure that this issue remains alive in the minds and hearts of people, those who are in prison should be adopted as prisoners of conscience. Because if they are not so adopted so that it becomes a scar on the conscience of the people of Africa, then they will be forgotten. And I think that it's important that these issues are brought to the fore. And finally, I just want to say, this idea that it's French speaking and English speaking. How many people in the so-called French speaking part even speak French? How many people in the so-called English part even speak English? It is once again the Europeans trying to define who we are. And we must always remember that the post-colonial state was actually designed to fail. I think the colonialists actually designed, they said, we want to appear to grant these people the opportunity to govern themselves, but let's watch them. We know in the next 5 years, they'll not even govern themselves. Of course, they have been frustrated because the people are woken up and they are making demands. And they are making demands which have been made in different parts of the world. Those demands have been made across Europe, in Italy, in Spain, in Sweden, in the Netherlands, in the former Soviet Union, in the Balkan states. But when they are made in Africa, then they are not legitimate. And I want to say something that some people often ask me, that isn't the struggle for Ambazonia or other peoples incompatible with our call for African unity? It is not. The self-determination is part of sustainable unity. It is when people have and enjoy their rights and are treated with dignity that they become part of a larger thing which is more sustainable. It's just like a part of the body. If you ignore your toe, then it's going to irritate the entire body. But if you take care of the toe or your tooth, then it's going to be a good member of the entire body.
That is just a simple and so factual, because exactly most of the time when we talk about this fragmentation or the small countries, like they call it breaking away, people are like, but we're talking about African unity. And I said, no, even in Europe, there are 45 countries. They are smaller. Look at Belgium. How many are they? They're not even up to 15 million. And if we look at all this patchwork, what they call the patchwork countries, they are self-determined. There are countries in the world with not even 1,000 or 2,000 or 3,000 of a population, and they have their nation and their country, and they determine how they want to live and rule themselves for a betterment of the global world. So if we would break up and be in peace with one another, so be it. Or whatever it is, it's a contribution to global world peace and security and economic growth for the African, and I think for the world in general. So I want to thank you so very much. We've come to an end of this very exclusive conversation. Prof, you are so welcome at any time to join us tomorrow.
Thank you
and
very much.
The next topics that will be coming up, we thank you and we do appreciate your time.
Thank you very much. Have a good evening and continue the good work of pricking the conscience of the continent of Africa. God bless you.
Right. Thank you.
God bless you too, Prof. Thank you so much. So we see us tomorrow with you, Dr. Edmond Polifak, on this very exclusive topic. And we would get in touch again. Tomorrow, it's going to be you. On Thursday, we're also going to be getting some very important guests in the diaspora. And we are going to be talking about the One Africa Conference in Detroit, Michigan, which Pan-African Daily TV is invited as a part to witness and to observe and to contribute to how we can unite ourselves. And it's called Power in Unity. So we're going to get the organizer, Mr. Taki Grant, who is actually the founder of the Happy Films, would be live with us on Thursday after we host you, Dr. Edmond. And then on Friday, we're going to get a very interesting and international expert, Dr. Rosalind Jeffries. We all know about Dr. Professor Leonard Jeffries, but this time we're going to get the Queen Mother to come and share some very important knowledge with us. Now, I want to ask you, before we get into the issue for tomorrow, because we're rounding up, just you close up and we go with that question. What is it that tomorrow you want me or the audience to tell the other guests that are coming for the One Africa Power in Unity conference in Detroit? I hope you are also going to attend to make a statement on the petition which you actually are drafting out there. One last word and we're gone.
Sure. One last word, Susan, that I want you to tell the people is that, if there is a truth in the world, it has to be universal. The plight of Ambazonia is the plight of mankind. Ambazonians want to be able to govern themselves. Ambazonian wants to be able to live under a free society. Ambazonian wants to be a system where a country where create a country that would allow the people of the part of the Black race, which is us, to be able to use our intellectual capability, our resources for the development of our people, so that the people, our brothers and sisters from around the world, when they visit Ambazonia 10 years after that war, can look up and say, yes, this is the reason why these people ultimately decided to fight and to win their independence. And I'm sitting here in the United States, which is where 200 and something years ago, people fought to actually overthrow the crown of England. And at the time, I'm sure that everybody who comes to America now, 200 and something years later, can say, yes, this was the reason why they fought. And for yours to help us to do that, please go and sign that petition that we just talked about, so that at least, even if, like my friend Professor LUMUMBA said, even if we cannot, as a people, be able, even if we don't have the power to do anything now, political power, we at least have the power to be able to go and sign this petition. We can at least use that to shame the world, to bring expression to the plight of the people and show the world what carnage is actually being caused and plunder in Amazonia that is actually going on by Biya and his masters, the French.
Okay, thank you so very much, Dr. Edmond. We see us tomorrow. I think it's going to be 2 hours late because of your constraint and work schedule. So we're calling on you, our audience, to join us again tomorrow. And Prof is going to sign in, like he said, to make a clear statement, particularly on this issue. But notwithstanding, the conflict in one African region is the conflict upon all of us. So it is not just like only the people of Southern Cameroon's Amazonia that is concerned. We actually have been treating each conflict that we've had on the continent, be it in Ethiopia or in Mali, in Gambia, in Guinea. All those conflicts, we've had experts here to educate us and to explain to us, whether it's Sudan or wherever. So we touch exactly where it hurts on the Pan-African Daily, because that's the one voice for Africans worldwide, this platform. If you're just signing in from any of the platforms that you're watching us, make sure that you've subscribed to this channel. Make sure you do also click the notification button, because we have a lot of interesting, powerful educational programs coming up all around the world from the diaspora community, and particularly for Africans by Africans for Africa. Thank you for being here. We see ourselves tomorrow, 8 p.m. And I think it should be 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time and in the Caribbean. We see us tomorrow. Bye-bye. God bless you. Bye. You are watching the Pan-African Daily TV with Dr. Susan Tata. The Africa we want. Unity, consciousness, our culture, our spirituality, our history. One Africa for Africans worldwide. Motherlands calling its diaspora home. Join my voice. Join my team. Join my campaign. Campaign 21 # 1 million subscribers on the Pan-African Daily TV YouTube. Be a volunteer. Apply now. Be the new Africa.